We're now on to topic 7 from Economics 3, and what we're going to be looking at in this topic is the labour market. We're going to look at what affects demand and supply of labour in a marketplace. The important thing to start this topic off with is an explanation of what we mean by a derived demand. Labour is an example of a derived demand. Businesses don't demand people for the satisfaction they get from employing people. They employ them because they need them to make something. So the satisfaction the business gets is from selling the products to make money. So demand for labour is not based on the demand for us as such, it's based on the demand for the product or the output. Other examples of products which have got a derived demand include transport, so travelling. People don't demand a bus because they like travelling on buses. They demand it because they want to get an education, so go to college, something like that. When we go on holiday, we don't demand the aeroplane for the fun of the flight normally. We demand it because we want to get on holiday. So we're demanding the holiday in effect. It's a bit like an indirect demand, I suppose. Right, so let's think about the demand for labour then, first of all. What I'll call DL, demand for labour. What affects the overall demand for labour? Now, what I want to say first of all is, if we put wage rates on the vertical axis and the number of people employed on the horizontal axis, the demand for labour is like this. When you think about it, it makes sense. At W1, Q1 people are employed. If wage rates fall, businesses will employ more people. So what will affect the demand for labour? What we say is the main 4 things that affect the demand for labour are, first of all, the MRP. So in other words, the amount of revenue a particular member of staff will generate for a business. So say, for example, a business employs 10 people already and the output is 10. If we employ another person and the output shoots up to 12, output's gone up by 2. The marginal revenue of that new unit of labour is 2 units of output. Demand for labour is also based on demand for the products. Okay, so think about it in macroeconomic terms. When the economy is growing, people are buying more goods and services, more people are employed. We need more people to produce more. It's also partly dependent on the price and availability of substitutes. Okay, so if it becomes cost effective to have a robot doing somebody's job, so more capital, they will replace people. If technology is expensive or if it's not available or not very good, then demand will be for people instead. It's also based on supplementary labour costs. So every single member of staff will get a salary, but that person will still cost the business more than that, such as the health and safety costs, the national insurance contribution we have to make on that person's behalf. As these go up, demand for labour will go down. Right, now let's draw a diagram to illustrate how a business will decide how many people to employ. So we've got the wage rate on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal axis. What I'm drawing here is the marginal cost of labour. So what this shows, every single member of staff this business employs will cost them W1. So if W1 is £25,000 a year, if you employ one person, your labour costs are £25,000. If you employ a second person, it's an additional £25,000. A third person, another £25,000. We want to know how many people will this business employ, and this will be based on the marginal revenue product. And this generally is shaped like this. So what this shows is, as a business starts to employ people, it's getting more economies of scale, increasing returns to scale. The efficiency of the business is picking up. Over time, though, the business will maybe start to be employing too many people. The efficiency might be starting to go down. If you've got too many people in your business, you've got to coordinate and communicate with them, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. That starts to become expensive the more people you employ. This business will employ Q1 people. Okay, let's think about why. To the left of this point, the MRP exceeds the wage rate. So across this entire output here, the business is getting more money back than it's costing them in labour. So if W1 was 25 grand, this person might be generating 30 grand. That's a 5 grand profit on that person. This person here even better. We're still paying them 25 grand, but they might be generating 35 grand for the business, so 10 grand profit. At this point, the person's costing us 25 grand, we're getting 25 grand back from them. Fantastic, no problem. But beyond this point, we can see here, for example, that the MRP of labour is less than the wage rate. So, for example, this person is costing us 25 grand, but we might only be getting back 20 grand from them, so we're making a £5,000 loss on that person. Obviously, if the wage rate was to fall, let's say to W2, more people will be employed at Q2. If the MRP increase, get a bit messy now, but it still shows the point, again, more people will be employed. I want to move on now to wage elasticity. So wage elasticity of demand. Now what we can have are two different shaped demand curves for labour. So again, quantity and the wage rate. Two very different shaped demand curves. This one, wage inelastic. This one, wage elastic. Let's think about what this means. Let's imagine at W1 Q1, Q1 people have been employed. If wage rate shoots up to W2, demand for labour only falls a small amount. We'll think about why this might be the case in a minute. Let's take another example. Again, at W1, Q1 people are employed. If wage rate increases by only a small amount to W2, we can see the demand for labour has fallen significantly to D2. Now let's think about what could make something inelastic. Short term. If a business is geared up to make a particular product and they need to produce more output the next day, if people suddenly demand a much higher wage, well, we can't replace them. We need them people. We're desperate for them. They're a necessity. We've got to pay them that higher wage. We've got to look at the availability of substitutes. Okay, now what I would say here is if they are limited, then a member of staff is very powerful. They can demand a much higher wage because we still need them. Good examples in football terms. Wayne Rooney, obviously one of the best strikers in the world. Messi, you could argue, well, definitely is probably the best striker in the world. If these two players were to demand a much higher wage from their employers will still employ them because there's no substitute for them. There's no one else that can do their job. It could also apply to capital or technology here as well. If there is no substitute for people, then higher wage rate, we still demand them. Another thing that will affect this is inelastic demand for the product. Okay, if people demand a much higher wage, but if the product that is being sold at the end of the day is very price inelastic, the business won't care if people demand a higher wage because what that business can do is pass them additional costs onto the customer. So it makes no difference to the business in this case. Another one. Low cost for labour relative to the output costs and prices. Let's take an example. If you've got a member of staff that only forms 1% of the overall cost of production, or 1% of the overall price the product is sold for, that person can probably double their wage demands, but it's still very insignificant and small for that business. If we were looking at a wage elastic demand curve, I'm not going to write these down. They're the opposite of these. In the long term, businesses are more elastic for people. In the long term, they can easily shift from one factory of production to another. Availability of substitutes limited. Well, clearly this time they'd be in big abundance. If people demand higher wage, we get rid of them. We get other people in, or we will shift to machinery. If the demand for the product is very elastic, then we can't pass the extra labour costs on to the customer. So we've got to be a lot more careful how much we raise people's wages by. If labour forms a very high percentage of the overall business costs, then again it's unlikely people will be in bigger demand with a higher wage rate. Okay, so if you were an employee, clearly you'd like your demand to be very wage inelastic, and the way you can do that is to make yourself irreplaceable. If you've got very important skills for that business, if there's very limited supply of you, then you can command a much higher wage rate than someone who hasn't got them skills.